40 million people fly, drive, and gamble their way into this city every single year. Yet in 1900, exactly 30 people lived here. Not 30,000, just 30. This is the Mojave Desert, a place so unforgiving that summer temperatures can reach 117 degrees in the shade. There's no coastline, no major river, almost no rainfall. By every measure, this is one of the last places on Earth where you'd expect a major city to rise. And yet, against all odds, humans built one of the most recognizable cities in the world right here. So how? More importantly, why? Every great city in history exists for an obvious reason. London grew around the River Thames. Chicago rose beside Lake Michigan. New York flourished because it sits on one of the finest natural harbors on Earth. Las Vegas has none of those advantages. No navigable river, no natural harbor, no fertile farmland worth mentioning. By every rule that shaped every other major city, Las Vegas should never have existed. Instead, it became the fastest-growing city in 20th century America. The explanation isn't a single stroke of luck, it's a chain reaction. 5 completely separate accidents, each one unlikely on its own, that somehow stacked together over the course of a single century. Remove any one of them, and there's a good chance Las Vegas never becomes more than another forgotten stop in the desert. The first accident began millions of years before anyone had ever heard the name Las Vegas. Deep beneath this valley, groundwater slowly collected and remained trapped underground for ages. Every so often, pressure forced that ancient water back to the surface, creating a handful of natural springs in the middle of an otherwise lifeless desert. Around those springs, something remarkable happened. Wild grasses appeared, wetlands formed. In the middle of the Mojave, a genuine oasis emerged. For thousands of years, native peoples, including the ancestors of today's Paiute, returned to these springs season after season, spending winters in the valley before moving into the nearby mountains during the hotter months. Then, in 1829, the outside world finally stumbled across the same oasis. A Spanish trading party crossing the Mojave on its way to Los Angeles discovered the springs almost by accident. One of the scouts, Rafael Rivera, looked at the lush grass growing around the water and gave the place a simple Spanish name, Las Vegas. The meadows, it sounded almost ironic, a tiny patch of green surrounded by endless sand. But for the next 70 years, that's essentially all Las Vegas was. Not a city, not a destination. Just a place where exhausted travelers could refill their canteens before continuing towards somewhere that actually mattered. At that point, nothing suggested a major city would ever rise here, but the desert was about to become valuable for a reason that had nothing to do with the oasis itself. The oasis solved one problem: it gave people a place to survive. But surviving isn't enough to build a city. Cities need a reason to exist. Las Vegas still didn't have one. That reason arrived in the early 20th century, and it came on steel rails. In 1902, a powerful U.S. senator named William Andrews Clark bought the land surrounding the springs for $55,000. More importantly, he bought something far more valuable than the land itself. He bought the water rights. Clark wasn't dreaming about casinos, luxury hotels, or neon lights. He wasn't trying to build a tourist destination. His goal was far simpler. He was building a railroad between Los Angeles and Salt Lake City. Steam locomotives consumed enormous amounts of water, and they needed reliable places to stop and refill along the route. This isolated valley happened to have exactly what they needed: water. That was the entire business plan. Las Vegas wasn't founded because someone believed people wanted to live here. It was founded because trains couldn't make the journey without stopping here first. On May 15, 1905, Clark's railroad company auctioned more than 1,000 parcels of desert land in a single day. That auction officially gave birth to the city of Las Vegas. But even then, its future was anything but guaranteed. Another developer quickly tried to build a rival town right next door. On paper, it looked like genuine competition. In reality, it never stood a chance. Clark controlled the only dependable water supply for miles in every direction, and he had no intention of sharing it. He simply refused to sell water to the competing settlement. Without water, people couldn't stay. Businesses couldn't operate. Growth became impossible. The rival town slowly withered before it ever had the chance to become a real competitor. In a way, Las Vegas survived because one man treated water as a monopoly. Had Clark sold access to those springs, the map of Nevada might look very different today. Even after winning that battle, though, Las Vegas was hardly a success story. For the next 20 years, it remained little more than a quiet railroad town. A few thousand residents, a handful of businesses, trains came, trains left. And for most Americans, Las Vegas was barely worth noticing. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't famous, it certainly wasn't rich. In fact, by the early 1920s, it looked as though the city's brief story might already be coming to an end. Then everything changed. And the next accident wasn't an opportunity. It was a crisis. For the first 2 decades of its existence, Las Vegas was exactly what William Clark had built it to be, a railroad town, nothing more. A few thousand people lived there, trains stopped for water, passengers came and went, and life moved at a quiet, predictable pace. It wasn't booming. It wasn't famous. And it certainly wasn't destined to become the entertainment capital of the world. Then, almost overnight, the foundation beneath the town began to collapse. In 1921, Union Pacific eliminated hundreds of railroad jobs in Las Vegas. For a town whose economy revolved almost entirely around the railroad, the impact was devastating. Businesses struggled, families left, the local economy began to unravel, and then things got even worse. The Great Depression swept across America. Banks failed, businesses closed, unemployment exploded nationwide. For many towns, it was a disaster. For Las Vegas, it looked like the final blow, but survival has a way of forcing desperate decisions. In 1931, the state of Nevada made two choices that would permanently alter the city's future. First, it legalized casino gambling across the state. Second, it reduced the residency requirement for divorce to just 6 weeks. Neither decision was driven by ideology, neither was about creating a playground for tourists. Nevada simply needed money, it needed jobs, it needed tax revenue. Above all, it needed people to come. The future Sin City wasn't created as a grand vision. It was born out of economic desperation. Ironically, gambling wasn't really new to Nevada. It had been legal decades earlier before being outlawed in 1910, but banning it never truly eliminated it. The casinos simply disappeared from Main Street and reappeared behind closed doors. Speakeasies, back rooms, illegal gambling halls. The business never vanished. It merely went underground. So when Nevada legalized gambling again in 1931, it wasn't creating an entirely new industry. It was bringing an already thriving black market into the daylight. The timing couldn't have been more extraordinary, because that same year, just 30 miles from Las Vegas, one of the largest engineering projects in human history was about to begin. And it would transform this forgotten railroad town forever. Construction began in 1931. The project would eventually become known as the Hoover Dam. At the time, it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The largest concrete structure humanity had ever attempted, a monument to engineering, built in the middle of one of the harshest deserts in North America. Over the next 5 years, more than 21,000 workers poured into southern Nevada to help build it. Most of them weren't heading to Las Vegas. They were heading for the dam. But before they could reach the construction site, they had to pass through the only real town anywhere nearby, Las Vegas. And suddenly, this quiet railroad stop found itself sitting at the front door of America's biggest construction project. This was the fourth accident, and arguably the one that saved the city. Remember the timing. The rest of the country was trapped in the Great Depression. Millions of Americans were desperately searching for work. But just outside Las Vegas, thousands of workers were collecting steady paychecks every single week. They worked long hours under brutal desert conditions, and when they finally had a day off, there was only one place to go: Las Vegas. They came looking for food, drinks, entertainment, gambling. Before long, Fremont Street began transforming into something entirely different. Casinos appeared. Bars multiplied. Showgirl clubs opened their doors. Every business was competing for the same customers: Hoover Dam workers with money in their pockets. For the first time in its history, Las Vegas wasn't simply surviving, it was thriving. Then in 1936, another unexpected gift arrived. The Hoover Dam was completed. Most people remember it for controlling floods and storing water. But for Las Vegas, its greatest contribution wasn't the dam itself, it was electricity. Massive amounts of cheap, reliable hydroelectric power. Power that could run hotels around the clock. Power that could illuminate thousands of lights every night. Power that made something entirely new possible. The Las Vegas Strip, neon signs became larger, brighter, more extravagant. They didn't simply advertise casinos. They became attractions in their own right. Long before people remembered the names of individual hotels, they remembered the lights. The city had finally found an identity, but its biggest transformation was still ahead, because Las Vegas had just become the only place in America where one very particular group of investors could openly make fortunes. And they weren't bankers. They weren't railroad executives, they were organized crime bosses. By the late 1930s, Las Vegas had something almost nowhere else in America could offer: legal casino gambling that made it incredibly attractive to a very specific type of investor, men with enormous amounts of cash and very few legal places to spend it. Across the East Coast, organized crime syndicates had become extraordinarily wealthy during Prohibition. Bootlegging, illegal gambling, racketeering. Their operations generated millions of dollars, but there was one problem. Dirty money is difficult to use. It has to be cleaned. Nevada's gambling laws offered the perfect solution. A casino could take in thousands of dollars every day, making it almost impossible to distinguish legitimate gambling revenue from laundered cash. Las Vegas wasn't simply welcoming investors. It was offering organized crime something no other state could, a legal business built around mountains of cash. Then, in 1946, one man changed the city's future forever. His name was Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. Backed financially by crime boss Meyer Lansky and other East Coast associates, Siegel opened a new casino unlike anything Las Vegas had ever seen, the Flamingo Hotel. Until then, most casinos felt like oversized frontier saloons, functional, dusty, built for gamblers. Siegel imagined something completely different. Inspired by glamorous Hollywood nightclubs, the Flamingo offered luxury instead of simplicity. Elegant architecture, fine dining, live entertainment, beautiful surroundings. It wasn't just a place to gamble, it was a destination. The project became wildly over budget. Construction delays mounted. Costs spiraled out of control. Siegel's partners grew impatient. Less than a year after the Flamingo opened, Bugsy Siegel was shot and killed at his girlfriend's Beverly Hills home. His vision, however, survived. In many ways, it outlived him. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, mob-backed casinos transformed the skyline. The Sands, the Sahara, the Riviera. These weren't simply hotels. They became symbols of a new Las Vegas. Soon, the biggest names in American entertainment followed. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr. Night after night, celebrities filled showrooms while gamblers filled casino floors. The city's reputation spread far beyond Nevada. Las Vegas was no longer a railroad stop. It was becoming an international icon. Ironically, the very people who helped build that image would eventually lose control of it. By the mid-1960s, federal investigators were steadily tightening their grip on organized crime. The mob's influence over the casinos was becoming increasingly difficult to hide. Then another unlikely figure arrived. Not a gangster, not a politician, a billionaire. And once again, Las Vegas reinvented itself. By the mid-1960s, the federal government was putting increasing pressure on organized crime. Investigations intensified, regulators closed in. The mob's grip on Las Vegas was beginning to weaken. At almost the perfect moment, a completely different kind of investor arrived. Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire, checked into the Desert Inn in 1966. According to the story, when hotel management asked him to leave after his reservation expired, he responded by buying the hotel instead. Then he bought another, and another, and another. Hughes paid in cash. He avoided the old mob-connected ownership groups. And almost overnight, he showed Wall Street that Las Vegas could be something more than a playground for organized crime. Nevada's lawmakers quickly recognized that the city's future depended on attracting legitimate corporate investment. So in 1967, they passed one of the most important laws in Las Vegas history, the Corporate Gaming Act. For the first time, publicly traded companies, not just individual license holders, could legally own casinos. It sounds like a technical legal change. In reality, it transformed the entire city. Casinos gradually stopped being family businesses. They stopped being mob operations. They became corporations. Boards of directors replaced crime bosses. Shareholders replaced silent partners. Balance sheets replaced backroom deals. That single law shaped the Las Vegas we know today. But Las Vegas has never survived by standing still. Reinvention has always been its greatest talent. Every time one business model reached its limit, the city found another. When gambling alone wasn't enough, Las Vegas reinvented itself as a family vacation destination during the 1990s. When that trend faded, it doubled down on luxury resorts, celebrity chefs, world-class restaurants, and massive convention centers. More recently, it has transformed itself once again. Professional sports, the NHL arrived, then the WNBA, then the NFL, and soon Major League Baseball, a city that once had 30 residents, now hosts some of the biggest sporting events in America. But after a century of surviving impossible odds, Las Vegas may once again be facing the same challenge that started this entire story. Water. Back in 1905, water was the one resource that made this city possible. Without those natural springs, there would have been no railroad stop, no railroad town, no Las Vegas. Today, those springs are no longer enough. Nearly all of the city's water now comes from Lake Mead, a reservoir that has been shrinking for years. Las Vegas continues to grow. The desert hasn't become any wetter. And the resource that gave birth to the city is becoming increasingly scarce. It's a strange twist of history. The very thing that made Las Vegas possible may ultimately define its limits. Because despite everything people associate with this city, the casinos, the neon, the luxury hotels, the entertainment, none of those things explain why Las Vegas exists. The real story is far stranger. It's the story of 5 unlikely accidents, a handful of desperate decisions, and a city that kept reinventing itself every time it should have disappeared. By every normal rule of geography, by every normal rule of economics, Las Vegas should never have existed. And yet, somehow, it does. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden history behind Las Vegas, you'll probably love our next story, about another American city that exists for an equally surprising reason. Watch our video explaining why Washington, D.C. has no skyscrapers by clicking on your screen now. And if you enjoy discovering the unexpected stories hidden behind places everyone thinks they already understand, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We upload a new hidden origin story every single week.